Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and we're going to have a discussion today with Mr. James Stevens Valliant. He is the author of Creating Christ, The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics, and he's a regular on Facebook. He's a swell guy. He's also with the Ayn Rand Center UK. Jim, welcome back.
Always great to be here, my brother. Always great to be here.
Jim,
You ask such intelligent questions. You have such a keen philosophical mind. It's a pleasure always to be on your show.
well, thank you. That's quite the compliment. So you and I did a podcast recently, and the subject of free will came up as part of the discussion. And in the comments on YouTube, somebody said, "Why don't you guys do a show on free will?" And you said, "Yeah, we should." And I thought, "Yeah, why not?" So that's what we're going to talk about today. So as an objectivist, what is, just to start us out, the broad objectivist view of free will?
That we have it. Humans are possessed of a capacity, at least a capacity for choice, and that all of our conscious actions are, in fact, the product of free will, that capacity for choice. And so when you ask the broadest sense of it for objectivists, we mean that for human beings, our conscious actions are the product of our faculty of choice, our faculty for volition. We believe in it, is the short answer.
It is. I was looking for you to go a little broader than
A
that.
little
Okay.
broader
It's
than
okay.
that.
The fundamental objectivist position on this is that the fundamental choice is that to think or not to think, to put forth the effort to begin a cognitive process or to remain dormant and not do so, right?
Exactly.
So, as somebody who's been in the movement for a long time, a friend of Leonard Peikoff, who actually wrote the Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, what does that mean to say to think or not to think is our basic act of volition?
Well, it is distinct to human beings in the sense that it is the initiation of a conceptual process of thought that is our most fundamental choice, and that really all of our other choices emanate from that choice. That our basic choice is to focus our consciousness or to not focus our consciousness. We know this internally. We know that it takes an effort. I can experience myself making such choices, but of all the choices I make, um, let's say I have a choice between going to the grocery store because I'm hungry, or going to work out because, geez, I didn't go to the gym yesterday, and I've got to work on my legs or something. And so what I do is I evaluate those two choices, and it is my capacity to evaluate, my capacity to conceptually identify the different choices that is really, and this applies to any choice that I make, isn't it? So most fundamentally, beneath all of these other choices that I make, and I do make dozens and dozens of choices every day. I mean, just to pick up my cup of coffee is a choice or not. But I did that, you see, deliberately to make an example. I picked up my coffee cup. So what we do, it's not that human choices don't have a reason behind them. It's that human beings choose the reason that will motivate their action. And at the root of that is the fundamental choice to think or not to think. And so thinking, the act of thought on the conceptual level, is precisely what objectivism regards as our faculty for free will.
So, Dr. Peikoff told me when I was able to ask him questions via the Ayn Rand Center UK to call him Leonard. So when we're talking to him, and you always refer to him Leonard, I'm just going to say Leonard
Yeah.
rather than Dr. Peikoff. Is that okay
It took
with
me,
you?
yeah, well, it took me years to get rid of the doctor and to call him Leonard because he's been saying that to me for 30 years, some years.
Yeah.
I finally automatized it. So please don't get that habit away from me because
Yeah.
even though we are creatures of free will, we're still also
Yeah.
creatures of habit.
Sure. It just seems awkward to me that I'm referring to like your best friend and I'm be like, Jim, when Dr. Peikoff says, and you're like, well, I just had tea with him. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yes, we have become very close recently, and yeah, Leonard is good. He'd
So
appreciate that too.
I'm actually going to disagree with Leonard a little bit here
Okay.
because in the book, the Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, he uses the analogy of a light switch. To think or not to think is like the flipping of a switch. And I disagree with that because it implies you go from one extreme to the other, right away. Boom. That's how it takes place. But that would entail basically going from being completely unconscious to completely conscious. I like to think of it more of like a dimmer switch or a volume on a stereo, because I'm never, unless I'm sleeping, completely unconscious. I am somewhat aware, and I can turn up my level of awareness to focus or not to focus. So, what are your thoughts on my small critique?
I like the dimmer switch analogy for many reasons, because there is a level of focus and a level of intensity on my mental focus that I can turn up or turn down. And that is, I think, for most of us, most of the time, that's what we're doing. We're turning up or down a dimmer, the equivalent of a dimmer switch, a greater, more intense focus or a less intense focus. And it takes effort. And the more effort, I mean, everyone can know, again, from the inside, that certain thought processes take a certain amount of effort and certain are much easier, although they do take some thought. On the other hand, I would observe to you that even a dimmer switch has an off-on component. That is to say, when I get to a certain, on most dimmer switches, you get to the certain point of low, just click, and now it's all off completely. And in a sense, that's true too. And so in that sense, I'm going to defend Leonard to that extent. That is to say, thinking takes an effort. I don't have to expend that effort. And there are many times when I catch myself on almost total autopilot. And I think there are other people who spend a lot of their time on pretty close to what is autopilot. Now, so there is an on-off component to what I think is actually, as you say, a much more complex thing. We can increase the intensity of our focus or direct the intensity of our focus. And in that sense, it's like a dimmer switch. But like most dimmer switches, there's an on-off component when you get to the very dimmest level.
It's true that we can, through introspection, see this happening. And it's even true that I can make the decision, like someone gives me something to think about. I don't want to think about that right now. I mean, I just can't. I can't focus on it. I'll deal with it later. So that is one argument for free will, is that it's evident from introspection that we make choices. But I want to delve into several of the objectivist arguments. So, what is the foundational argument for free will from an objectivist point of view?
Well, it is something we know directly from internal experience, from introspection, and therefore it is an axiomatic concept. That is to say, a concept that we derive directly from immediate perception and which is foundational and applies to everything in the category. So I can't understand thought, in effect. It's hopeless to even try to understand conceptual thought without the concept of free will. In fact, there's a whole category of awareness that is simply unavailable to me. In fact, everyone uses concepts that assume free will all the time. And in this sense, it's like any other axiom. It's a foundation for everything else I know about conceptual consciousness. And so it's axiomatic. And it's axiomatic for the other reason, too. We know it, that is to say, the axiomatic concept of free will is derived directly from observation. And so that's what we mean. It is a faculty of human consciousness. That is to say, when I'm asleep, I don't die. I'm not consciously in control of my heartbeat, my respiration, my digestion. If I have a restless night sleeping, my leg might kick out and upset my wife or something. She's told me that before. She said, you were anxious when you went to bed, or you had a tummy ache when you went to bed, and you had a restless night of sleeping. Well, all of that was outside of my volitional control. So there's a whole bunch of physical things that happen that are not under my volitional control. It is my conceptual faculty. It is my mode of consciousness as a human being that is under my control. And that has to really be borne in mind very, very carefully. Consider all the aspects of that, and you begin to understand what we mean in that regard. Repeat your question again so that I make sure I haven't missed.
I want you to give me the objectivist arguments in favor of free will.
Well, it is a faculty of consciousness, as I just said. And like any other faculty of consciousness, it can only be known in the way that I just described. Let me give you free will is, in effect, our ability to regulate and control our conceptual level of consciousness. Well, that makes it like any other faculty of consciousness. And in this regard, I'll compare it to, say, memory. How do you know that you have the faculty of memory? If someone said, Michael, how do you know that you have memory as a faculty, that you can remember things? You'd instantly introspect and you'd say, well, I can remember that party we were at the other day, Jim. Don't you remember? We met that girl and okay. And so you would instantly go back, look into your own mind and say, it is through my own introspection directly that I know I have this faculty of memory. Only by inference do I know that you have that faculty of memory, because I don't have direct access to your consciousness. On the other hand, if I bring up that point, hey, you remember that party we were at the other night? And you remember we met that girl? And you say, oh yeah, she had blonde hair and she told some really good jokes. Then I would be able to infer that you too have a faculty of memory, just as I know introspectively. And so you're a being possessed of free will as well, from my inference, but it's an inference based on my knowledge about my own memory or free will. And so I see you making choices, and sir, you have, you're actually a poster child for the power of free will, if I might give you another compliment, which you've richly earned. But the point is that I can infer from your conduct and your biography and just speaking with you, I can infer that you too have a faculty of choice and can direct and focus your consciousness just as I can.
So I recently had a discussion with someone about this, and to me, the idea of determinism is ultimately incoherent. You just run into a nimity of contradictions as you start to discuss it, because ultimately the person is trying to convince you of something, and that implies that I have the ability to think or not to think about it. But here was his point, and I think it's a valid one. There is, he didn't put it quite in these terms, but I'm going to. So if you run into a contradiction, we know at least one of them is false. So if the person is talking to me and assuming free will while preaching determinism, it might be the free will assumption that is wrong. What I mean is that it's possible. I don't like the word possible, but I can conceive of a situation or a reality where, although I feel that I'm free, and although it is contradictory, my behavior is determined. Now, when somebody puts that argument to me, my response is okay, but from introspection, it certainly seems I'm free to make choices. I know the difference between putting in effort and not putting effort. I also know the difference between compulsion and me freely choosing things. So if somebody's going to assert that determinism is possible, the onus is on them then to present the abundance of evidence to prove it. And they simply have not done that. And as Dr. Locke shows in his book on the subject, at least one of them, the one that I read, a lot of the studies claiming to show determinism are fraught with problems, right? But just on the axiomatic aspect, for instance, it is a logical impossibility for things, and I don't want to get into the analytic synthetic dichotomy. I'm going to use philosophical language that I know has difficulties in it, but I don't know how else to communicate it. But it's, by definition, it's a contradiction to say a thing is and is not at the same time, right? It's impossible for me to make a statement without me also being conscious. So if I say I'm not conscious, I'm out of the water, right? To say a thing doesn't have identity is contradictory by definition. But to say that I'm determined doesn't have the same problem there.
Oh, it does. It does. It
Okay,
does.
well,
If
if
you can't,
it does, explain
if
how it does.
well, no, it invalidates all conceptual thought to say that you don't have free will. I mean, simply
I agree with
invalidate every
that.
word. No, in fact, as Aristotle said of the law of non-contradiction, once you use a single word like man or horse, you're committed to the law of non-contradiction. Similarly, if you use the conceptual level of consciousness, you're equally committed to the idea of free will.
I agree
Every
with that.
idea that is asserted is an assertion, and it is an assertion of, and if I'm trying to point something out to you, teach you something, much less argue something, I'm assuming that you have the faculty of free will too. I'm assuming that
Absolutely.
I have compared the false and the true and chosen the true. No, 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 there is a horse there. That is a horse. And so, wait, how do you know that? And, if everything were truly determined, if all my knowledge were truly determined, then whether it was true or false would be an irrelevant question,
I
a
agree
question
with that.
inaccessible to us.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think that it creates an enormous weighting toward free will.
Well, more than that, but like any other axiom, it's a universal observation. I've never met a determinist who has not been aware of the full awareness of his own free will. He calls it an illusion. Now,
Yes.
I can call anything that I see universally existence, the color
Right.
blue. I could say blue is an illusion, Michael. And if someone walked up to you and said the color blue is an illusion, you'd say, well, you'd start pointing to blue things. By blue, I mean this and this and this, as
Right.
opposed to this and this and this and this and this. And you're telling me that you don't see blue, presuming he's he's not colorblind. And the guy can see the distinction, but still says, oh no, but blue is an illusion. Then I have a bit, then not only does he have an onus of proof, he got a whole volume of arguments that he's going to have to get off the ground to make that possible. The name of Professor Locke's book is The Illusion of Determinism, a beautiful play on words.
Yes.
I would note that Professor Locke is one of the most widely academically cited academic psychologists in the world, and he's written a very powerful book, The Illusion of Determinism, on this very subject. This guy is no academic lightweight. As I say, in his own field, he may be the most widely academically cited psychologist in the field of motivational psychology, which is really, really relevant because free will is intimately connected, of course, with motivational psychology. In any case, there is no determinist on the planet who doesn't have the same observation of free will that you and I do. He just calls an observation an illusion.
Yes.
And so, like any other axiom, like any other even that conceptual piece of information that I directly derive from sense perception, like the color blue, what he's saying, in effect, is a denial of consciousness. And what's really poetic about it is that the determinist will have a position that says everyone else is deluded. Now, without free will, how did he escape from that delusion?
I agree with you 100%. What I'm saying, though, is that first of all, we know we can't prove free will because proof is contingent on free will.
Well, that's true, but I can infer.
We can infer it. I know.
Well, let me put it this way. I know it directly from introspection, yes. But I can infer, for example, that you have free will, but the pine tree in my backyard does not have free will. And I can do that. I do that through inference. I can also know that free will is an axiom through inference, just as all other axioms cannot be proven. They are the basis of all proof, volition being one of them, like the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah.
In the exact same way that non-contradiction is the basis for all logic, and therefore all rational conceptual thought, so in the same way, volition is a basic precondition that cannot in itself be proved. Sure. On the other hand, I can point out by inference that other humans have free will, and to a marvelous degree. Look at the creativity of human beings. Look at the astonishing things we can do for the good. I mean, the level of human creativity, from composing operas to splitting atoms to hitting golf balls on the moon, suggests the most radical control, the most astonishing creative capacity. Also, we can have the most astonishing errors and mistakes. We can destroy ourselves through conceptual thought. By committing ourselves to certain conceptual evaluations, we can do a Nazi Holocaust. And human beings are capable of that as well. We can act as our self-destroyers all the way to total self-destruction, or the most amazing creative art and science that you can possibly imagine. So I can look at that range and infer that other people have more than that. Let me infer that it's an axiom. I think I did that a little bit already. It is the base, the inescapable base. The harder, affirmation through denial is always great with axioms. Just have the guy argue for him. Just like, no, it's obvious that we don't have any faculty to even distinguish between determinism and free will. He'll then set off on an argument to prove determinism. And the harder he argues for determinism, the harder he's demonstrating and proving, so that at every step of the way, I can say, oh, I'm glad you believe in free will. Well, no, no, no. You've got to see, Jim. And if you just focus on this, or if you consider that, I'll convince you to change your mind and become a determinist. And so the harder he argues for determinism, the more he's using free will, the more he's contradicting himself, the more. And so affirmation through denial is also a feature of every axiomatic concept. It is
Sure.
inescapable and undeniable. And the more you insist on it, the more you're committed to it.
Here's where I'm not going to say I disagree. Well, I am. I disagree slightly, and here's why. What you can do is demonstrate the incoherence of an argument that somebody's putting forth to argue for determinism. But that in of itself doesn't demonstrate the truth.
Oh, it
of
demonstrates
free
its
will.
role in the hierarchy.
What I'm saying is that the person could put forth the theoretical possibility that all knowledge, everything that we think we know, memories, it's all just determined and it's all nonsensical. Now, here's where I would agree with you, and this is where I think additional factors into other than just the axiomatic nature of free will has to be brought in. When you're dealing with existence, identity, and consciousness, their nature as axiomatic concepts is enough to demonstrate their truth, their reality. When it comes to free will, I think you need a little more. And what I mean is this. So if somebody were to say, well, what if free will is just an illusion, like you just said? Well, hold on. That reminds me of the brain in the vat problem, for instance. Well, how do you know we're not all just brains in a vat? If you're going to assert something that arbitrarily, then you would better bring forth something. And it's the same thing with asserting, well, what if we are all determinists? I mean, all determined, and none of this makes any sense. Then I would flip it back. Well, then that's the assertion, then demonstrate it.
Well,
Prove
yeah.
it. Because all my experience, and not just like, it's true, I only know directly of my own free will. I can only experience directly. But the fact that different people respond differently to the same environment, and even the same person can respond differently to the same situation, but at different times, is indicative to me of free will, that people are making choices. They're not just determined in the way that atoms are.
You yourself, though, when you say prove it to the determinist, you're assuming free will. That he could
I
that he
agree.
could
You
initiate
are.
a
No, I
process of
agree. I
demonstration,
agree. I
and
agree. It's an
therefore, so
assumption.
you see what you can do though is point that out to him. Look, even you actually do have the operative belief in free will. It's built into the concepts, the basic concepts on which all the rest of your knowledge are based. And just as I pointed out there, in your attempt to argue for it, you are engaging in it. And so, what I can prove is not that I have that he has free will or that I have free will, because he's got to learn that he's got free will from inside. And there's no proof, as you point out, of it. What I can prove is that it's at the base of knowledge in the same way that I can with other axioms.
Yes,
He
I
had to
agree with that.
engage in volition.
Yes,
And so I can show him that, in fact, he has to engage in volition in order to attempt to prove even determinism.
yes,
And once you've shown that it's the base of knowledge, then even you're asking him, saying, well, the burden of proof is on you. That really only makes sense in a context where some basic axioms are already behind us and under our belt. And that's one of them. In other words, if you're asking him to prove free will, and if he sees it as, okay, you're right, I'll try to prove free will, and he doesn't see the connection between any attempt to prove and the assumption of free will behind any attempt to prove, then that's really got to be our first stop. Now, it's true that you can say a burden of proof in one sense. You can say that you can point out that you would need to show me, in other words, that this was an illusion, how it was an illusion, why it was an illusion, why I would be mistaken, why it isn't the hierarchically at the foundation of all conceptual thought, and that would be the requirement that he would have to do. Now, I know of no such other concept that exists in human knowledge or ever has existed in human knowledge. It's more like the concept of God that people assumed for a long time. Utterly baseless, obviously a contradiction of axioms, but something people passionately believe in, mostly for emotional reasons. Now, I'm not saying, I say mostly for on purpose here. There are a lot of people who believe, just like a lot of people believe in God, for reasons that they can articulate as reasons. So people believe in determinism for reasons they can articulate. Hey, modern science shows that everything, for example, you can predict with perfect exactness the position of Mars on a certain date 500 years from now. Absolutely. Because I can tell you with absolute certainty, there's nothing that doesn't, and it's utterly necessitated that the Mars will be in that position 500 years from now in a way that a human choice, human behavior is not. Now, if someone can hear your biography, for example, and still say, well, no, it's the way we're raised, it's who our parents are, it's the conditions of our childhood that will inevitably doom us in a certain direction. And if someone can look at you, understand your biography. In fact, Leonard Peikoff, speaking of my friend Leonard Peikoff, I've explained your biography to him, and his exact words are, he must be a very remarkable man. It is true that people have free will, but we're not ignorant of the influences of, and sometimes powerful, insurmountable, sometimes things that we can't overcome. But you, sir, are like a poster child of how much the human mind can overcome with free will, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that what I was getting at more than anything else, although I didn't really know that that's what I was getting at, is the fact that free will can't be proven because it's the base of all proof. So any discussion has to assume it. That doesn't prove that it's true. What it proves is that if we don't have free will, then the discussion is pointless. I just want to show you. I hope I can get this in, maybe. I can. That's the new tat, Jim.
That is the coolest tat. I've seen some cool tats in my time. I'm not one of these people who has a religious opposition to tattoos. That is the coolest tattoo I've ever seen.
Yeah,
it's the famous statue.
I want you to explain its relevance to the present discussion so people don't think I'm just some nut who comes out and shows the tattoo.
Well, it's a magnificent statue of this powerful, muscular guy with a hammer in his hand and a chisel in the other, and he's carving himself out of stone. And you can see him, pulling up with his strong muscle to chisel himself out of stone to create this magnificent being underneath. And the name of the sculpture, very appropriately, is The Self-Made Man. It's a metaphor. It's a visual metaphor in bronze cast of how humans do shape their own consciousness. See, we don't deny that people have characteristics. We don't deny that people have moral character, indeed psychological personality. Those are actual features of human consciousness. But it is remarkable the extent to which we can shape it, even despite our childhood experiences that we're already operating, and at first, sometimes in a subconscious level, operating to shape our consciousness. And believe me, habit is powerful. Psychological features are powerful. Sometimes they're hard to overcome. Habits are sometimes really, really hard to break. Changing one's character is really difficult. But character, as Aristotle understood, and as Ayn Rand particularly understood, she said man is a being of self-made soul, and that's a visual sort of representation of that in a sculpture. But look, all evaluation as such, all normative assertions, if someone came along and said, we really ought to believe in determinism, ought we now? You really should do this. Well, should we now? Now, it's true, as I was saying, there are features that get built in. Every time, it's funny when we act, each time we act, we make a choice, we act, we're sort of digging a groove. It's like those old vinyl LPs, the way they used to make it. You dig a groove into them, and each time it goes around, the groove gets a little deeper and a little deeper, and it gets harder and harder. And to get that needle off and onto another groove so that we can change that those initial steps are the real bitch, aren't they? But to get us on a new groove, to create a whole new character, moral character for ourselves, a whole new set of habituated habits and way of looking at it is possible. But that's at the level, and we each have a moral responsibility to develop our own moral character. Aristotle understood this. Ayn Rand understood this. You can't talk morality. You can't talk normative concepts at all, except by assuming free will. And the minute someone argues for the opposite, they're committed to free will. utterly committed. And that's what needs to first be pointed out. Y'all believe that there's this illusion. Well, what if it isn't an illusion? You're trying to say, don't believe your damn lying eyes, when in fact, what I'm saying is blue exists and free will exists, and I've got a memory and you've got, in other words, if someone said to you, memory is an illusion, and what would you do? There'd really be no way of arguing that. You could say, well, look, people have written, I could get out my first edition of the Fountainhead and I could say, this is a whole big thick book filled with memories that you had of reading the book. But you see, books are like a giant storehouse of someone's memory, and it contains a memory in itself that can be retrieved, right? It doesn't have a consciousness or memory. My consciousness can retrieve from that encoded series of memories of the author, and I can extract that. So you can say, well, the idea of memory is absurd to deny. Well, the idea of free will is equally absurd to deny. As I just pointed out, for example, you don't get any normative concepts unless you assume free will. Nor can you persuade me of anything, including determinism, unless you assume the existence of free will. And so if someone were to say determinism is an illusion, my response might be something like, well, prove to me that you have memory. Well, I can't really. All I can do is directly introspect memories that I've had. Yes, I was at that party last week.
Jim, when I was getting the tattoo, there's multiple tattoo artists, and one of them asked me, what is the significance? And that's what I explained. And I explained it's more spiritual for me, given my own experience of self-made soul. And there's something that sometimes gets, I don't know, people don't grasp, is I received a ton of help materially that helped me get established when I got out of prison. That's true. But the one thing nobody could do for me is when I decided to become a better person and I had to start shifting my thinking. Nobody can do that for me. I had to do it. Nobody can say, go through the struggles, challenge yourself, question yourself. I had to do it. And now, even though it was a time in my life when I didn't question myself, that is so foreign to me. I don't understand how people don't do it. Like when people get an automatic thought or an automatic emotion and just accept that that's validly giving them information, that's crazy to me. I remember maybe a year and a half ago, I was having a conversation with my friend and we were having an argument. And he said to me after, he said, wow, he said, I could actually see you during the argument analyzing yourself and questioning yourself to see if you were right or wrong during the discussion.
I see the same thing in you all the time.
But that's something that
you're an active thinker.
Yeah,
when you're interviewing someone, I see in your face active thought processing. Sometimes you'll say, oh, that's added to my knowledge, or that's changed my information, or that's more usually that's added a new piece of information on that is now helpful to this point I have over here. You're an active listener in an interview, and that's why your interviews are so wonderfully dynamic. But it is particularly poetic on your arm, my brother.
I just can't imagine, and that's I guess what that analogy of the light switch, or as we talked about the dimmer switch, is you have to turn that on and be attuned to question.
Well, the lower I have the dim switch, the more determinism is real. The more I go on autopilot, the more I am a determined automaton of my environmental and genetic forces.
How did you just pronounce that?
Automaton.
Is that correct? Is that how it's actually pronounced?
Well, automaton. I've heard it pronounced various ways. But and in the world of English today, between the way people speak it in Scotland, London, New York, or Los Angeles, I think we can have some latitude with pronunciation. Automaton, if you prefer.
Especially as you come from the California Valiants, I think that
indeed I do.
Yes, the way the California Valiants.
The California Valiants pronounce it, yes.
Jim,
automaton.
No, I liked automaton. I thought that was great. But before we go, I just want to differentiate between the objectivist concept of volition and other concepts of free will. So what are some of the other concepts?
Well, mostly it's a religious concept, and that's what gives some scientific veneer. One of the things that gives some scientific veneer to the concept of determinism. Religious people very frequently are determinists, by the way. Well, many religious ideas are utterly deterministic. God controls everything, set
Yeah.
everything in motion. It's all predetermined. Predestination is a religious concept in many religions, because if God is truly omnipotent and omniscient, he knew everything that would happen and made it such that everything would happen. And that leaves precious little room for free will. On the other hand, many of the people who've argued for free will are also arguing that, in fact, you have to choose to believe in God or choose to commit to Jesus to save your soul. And we all have this faculty of free will to explain why God can be so morally judgmental of human beings, because it's really a contradiction if you think about it. How can God send some people to heaven, some people to hell, if we really don't, and none of us have any choice? Well, that's a problem that religion has had. But religion's arguments are inherently irrational, including those who attempt to have free will, but they have it as a sort of mystical property. And this reached its climax with the famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who put it in the category free will in the same category as the immortal soul and God. So we know God exists, an immortal soul exists in the noumenal real world. We know that free will. Now, what is free will? Why, it's a complete departure from causation. At least Kant said causation is a category of human consciousness.
Yeah.
It's not
Free
a be
will was
true.
actually one of the three antinomies.
That's exactly correct.
God, freedom, and immortality
you,
were
you,
the three
you,
antinomies.
you
Yeah.
nailed it, my brother. And those are the things that we can know are in the noumenal world, precisely because, you see, and it fits, like I say, with his view of causation, which for him is purely the way we have to think about things. It's a category of human consciousness. Now, your real positivist, materialist type determinists say, no, it's like the planet Mars, like I was referring to earlier. Everything is like the planet Mars. Everything's like a billiard ball. Once you know the initial hit, what's interesting about billiards, of course, because every hit is a choice by some player. But we'll ignore the player who's got the cue. It's once the white ball has been hit, the cue ball has been hit, everything is determined thereafter in a mathematical way, and there's no changing it. And the way they look at the universe is a giant billiard table with balls flying around, and nothing can be different than a billiard ball. Well, even modern science and technology has shown that's a ridiculously narrow view of causation. It's not that free will is not an example of causation. It is. We must choose. There's a certain course of action that by our natures as humans we must do when we are conscious. Choose to up the dial or down the dial on free will, and that we are compelled to do. We are determined to choose. I have no choice in the fact that I must choose under certain circumstances. And my choice is not a magical property. That is to say, I can't turn myself into, a bodybuilder, megastar by that. I can choose to take steps like going to the gym and working out and at least improving where I am with my muscles, but I can't fly to the moon by flapping my arms. That free will does not allow me to do. Free will is not a magical thing. I have got a limited context, a limited consciousness. I can only, for example, choose, let's see, I have an acorn in my hand. I can mash it up and turn it into acorn meal, or I can plant it and under the right circumstances, it'll turn into an oak tree. So I'm operating within the potentialities, the metaphysical potentialities that are already there. And the metaphysical potentialities of anything, like an acorn, are already set in there. I can't turn the acorn into a pumpkin or to an atomic bomb simply through my magic of free will. Free will is not a magical thing. It's a very limited thing. It's limited in scope, but in the same breath I say that, I have to return to look at the astonishing creativity of human beings. And each of us can improve our condition. And again, that's why it's so poetic that tattoo's on your arm, because you have shown just how much humans can do despite those limitations, despite what nature throws at us. Most of us have a hard time, a really hard time, fighting against what nature has thrown at us, circumstantially, especially. And there's sometimes where I have absolutely no control. I'll get cancer, get struck by lightning, maybe have no control over something that happens to me and I'm dead, and I have no control, whatever. We're not saying that we have any magical powers by saying we have free will. Coming right back to where we started, all we're saying is that you have the power to focus your consciousness and to initiate conceptual thought.
Jim, what about the existentialists? Because I got to tell you, even though I find a lot to differ with them, especially when it comes to their subjectivism, I did receive some help in reading, for instance, Viktor Frankl or Rollo May. Carl Rogers, I don't know if he would fall neatly into the existentialist psychotherapies. He was a humanist, but he's similar in his idea of human freedom. What's your thoughts on them? Do you see anything of value? Because I do. I just wondering what you think about it.
I think that Viktor Frankl says some, and certainly Carl Rogers, although I'm not sure I'd classify him as an existentialist. But
the reason I thought he was in a book I read on existential psychotherapy, and they included Carl Rogers, so that's why I have him thought. And I mean, I read his book on becoming a person, and there was so much in there that I disagreed with, but there were some gems that I found very helpful in my own growth.
I find gems in Viktor Frankl too, and so. Now, it's true that your existentialist believes in free will, but unlike, say, Ayn Rand or Aristotle, they haven't really contributed to our understanding of free will as is insofar as what it actually is and is not. More than that, they regard the existence of freedom of free will as sort of a plight, a disaster that we face. Kierkegaard, if you choose one side, then you're down one. You've killed that whole thing by making a certain choice. You've killed a whole chain that might have happened, and therefore it's a tragedy. It's a plight. We can't have everything. I can't have my cake and eat it too. And I've got this free will. Therefore, I'm in this existential morass. And so the difference between Aristotle and Ayn Rand, I would say, on the subject is they regard it as a power, as the source and, in fact, the precondition of human virtue, as opposed to an existential problem that must lead to nausea and angst or trapping me forever. It's true that once I've made a choice, it's carved in stone. I can't go back and undo a choice I made several years ago. And I have made some choices that I have lived to regret. And I would love to be able to go back and erase that. But again, my free will is not a magical power. What I can do is cope with the situation. Even if I did make what I determine is a bad decision, I can make amends for it, change my character, do something about it to make myself better and to fix the problems that I may have caused, at least to some extent. That's what free will is. My free will is even my ability to course correct. And so, unlike the existentialists, Objectivism and Aristotelianism don't regard it as a metaphysical plight that we're in. They regard it as the foundation for being an ethical being, for being able to improve my situation. Can I turn myself into, a god? No, but I can improve my situation with it. And you, sir, are a poster child for that. That's why that tattoo, like I say, is so eloquent on your arm in particular.
Jim, I've been dying to tell you today. I don't know why, but I want to tell you a quick story that has nothing to do with free will, but it's humorous, and I think you'll get a kick out of it, and hopefully the audience will. So as people, I'm sure, noticed, I have this chip on my tooth. So this is how it happened. In prison, I needed to get my TV hung up so that I can watch the television. So I had a guy come in, and he was going to do it for me because I had no idea how to do it. So he took my chair and he brought it over next to the bed. Now that's the chair I usually use to get up and down on the top bunk, but he had it. But then he needed some help. So I, finagled my way, got on the top bunk, and I'm there helping him. And then I wanted to get down. The problem is the floor in the cell is disgusting. So I never put my socks down on the floor. I step right out of my shoes onto the chair and get up. So I'm thinking, damn, I don't want to jump down off this bunk and get on this dirty floor. So I saw my sneakers and I said, I'll bet you I can jump down, land on my sneakers, and then put them on. Well, the cell door was open. So I'm on the end of the bunk and I jumped down and I bounced and fell straight onto the concrete. Busted my tooth. I swear to God, Jim, I thought I was going to get up and be covered in blood. How I wasn't, I don't know. My neighbor said the sound made him sick to his stomach. Right? So I say, uh-oh. I get up and I look, I'm fine, and I spit out the piece of the tooth, and I said, I'm good, no problem. But here was the funny thing. The guy that's putting up my TV is not supposed to be in my cell, but he's in my
Oh,
cell putting the TV up. The
oh,
CO, actually, the correctional officer, actually caught him in my cell earlier and told him, hurry up with that. Right? So the problem now is if I had been damaged like I thought I was going to be, good luck explaining that. Right? No, we weren't fighting in there. I just happened to fall off my bed. My face is smashed. But
right.
oh my goodness.
The chipped
But
tooth and the bruised nose
yeah,
doesn't give away.
yes. But people frequently tell me I need to get it fixed. But I find that now it's a good story. It's a
It's a
part of
great
my.
story.
It's very it gives character to the whole thing. So I roll.
It
with
does. It does. It does. It does. My face has got all kinds of scars from nothing so interesting as even yours. Just stupidity on my part in most cases, or getting beat up in other cases. But the point is, I've got all kinds of scars. I wouldn't think of getting rid of them. I think they
No,
add character to my face too.
right, and
For
it does tie
individualism, why
into
not
free
show that
will.
off?
It
Yeah,
ties into free will in that I'm free to not fix it. But another guy said to me, he said, "No, man," he said, "that gives a good story." He said, "But you don't tell him." He said, "If someone asks you what happened, you just say happened in prison."
happen in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say happen in that way. You will be known as the badass you are, and people will think twice about taking you on. Yeah, why not?
All right, Jim. So where could people find you?
Well, you said it in the beginning. Well, first thing, I'm here on your brilliant podcast on a frequent basis. So if you find any of this interesting, please come and see me here. I'm also on Facebook almost every single day, answering questions about objectivism or my books or so forth. And I also do regular podcasts for the Ayn Rand Center UK. Um, yeah, that's me. Those are
Jim,
the product of the choices that I've made recently.
they really, really are. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Anytime,
For,
my brother.
for now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Please leave your comments, share the episode with your friends, tell people about us. We could use it to grow. Till next time.